Alright everybody, here's your Friday morning update on my native tank. I've been working on this for a Columnaris outbreak I had recently, and yesterday was my final treatment. I removed a lot of the water that had the antibiotic in it, and then I dosed the tank with a heavy dose of salt. I put 1 tablespoon per gallon of water in here. So I've got 120 tablespoons of salt in this tank right now. When I say salt, I mean sodium chloride. I'm not talking about marine salts that you would use for either a marine tank or a brackish tank. I am simply talking about sodium chloride, which would be the equivalent of aquarium salt. But I really jacked up the dosage. I put it up to about as high as you can go and still call it fresh water. And I was a little concerned overnight. I wasn't worried about either the minnow, the creek chub you can see swimming around in there. The crayfish will be fine. They can probably tolerate all the way up to brackish water, actual brackish water. I do have a little bit more carnage in here. We've got another couple crayfish, one in the back. That one back there actually looks like a slough rather than an actual dead crayfish. And this one right here, you can see like meat torn out of it and chunks of flesh and stuff. So that's obviously a torn up crayfish. This one here actually has some beautiful markings and colors on it, and the only fish I was really concerned about in this tank was the smallmouth bass. I really don't know much about their hardiness when it comes to water chemistry. I know they're hardy as far as being serious fighters and aggressive and stuff like that. When you catch them out in the wild, they're fantastic fish to catch, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily tolerant to changes in water conditions, or they can survive a wide variety of water conditions or whatever. I really don't know much about the parameters of what a smallmouth bass can live in. I've always just sort of brought them home and put them in my tank and hoped for the best. And in this case, with the amount of salt I've got in there, I was really kind of just throwing the dice and crossing my fingers and assuming that it was going to be okay for them because of the fact that I've kept the salt within the range of still calling it fresh water. He looks fine. Actually, when I turned the lights on this morning, the color on the smallmouth was fantastic. It actually looked better than it has. And now these crayfish I'm looking at actually look really good this morning too. The few I've seen out walking around, it almost seems like their color has come up even more. So maybe having some salt in the water is not a bad thing at all. Maybe it's actually what these fish needed, and I'm sure it's going to be enough to kill off the Columnaris. It's a very salt sensitive bacteria, and even just having a little bit of salt in the tank should be enough to kill off the Columnaris completely, if any was left over after my antibiotic treatment. I also just noticed under here we got another crayfish that's been chewed on and torn up, and that is the work of the Mayan cichlid. We saw that yesterday. I was shooting a video, and while I was shooting it, the Mayan cichlid actually started attacking one of the crayfish and was biting chunks out of it, like out of its shell. So apparently the Mayan cichlids have teeth and are very aggressive. There's a fairly large crayfish back there with no claws, so apparently the Mayan cichlid has been working on that one too. So there you go. It was just a little brief morning update. I was kind of worried we were going to come in here and find the fish swimming around funny because there's too much salt in the water or whatever else, but that does not seem to be the case. I will say that if we look at this wood here, this wood didn't look like that yesterday. See how it has that sort of white haze all over it? That wasn't there yesterday. So if that's a result of something dying on the wood, it didn't die as a result of the medication I put in there. That's only happened since I put the salt in there. I also want to point out on that power head back there, at first when I started treating with the antibiotics, it started developing sort of a white fuzz on it, and I assumed that was the dying bacteria that we were seeing. And now that I've added salt, we've got it back again. So apparently whatever I dosed with the antibiotics was not fully effective, because we can see here on the end too. When I first started dosing, I started noticing all of that sort of flaking, scaling appearance where, again, I'm assuming growing bacteria is dying and leaving that appearance and leaving that sort of white film appearance. And all that went away. By the end of the 5-day treatment of the antibiotics, the tank looked fairly normal. And I was assuming that everything had gotten back to normal, but now that I've dosed with salt, we've got that again. So that makes me wonder if I had not completely killed it off, and the salt is actually what's, finally doing the trick. I've also found out that I probably could have just used salt right from the beginning and didn't have to go through all the medication process or anything. I simply could have salted the tank. And again, this bacteria, the Columnaris bacteria, is so salt sensitive that even just dosing it at a little more than a teaspoon per gallon ought to be enough to kill off any of the bacteria in the tank. So the whopping tablespoon per gallon that I have in here should certainly do the trick. So I'm going to go ahead and call that the end of the video. I just really wanted to make sure everybody was in here and still alive. I guess I'll probably get in here and start cleaning out some of these dead crayfish. It's one thing to leave a crayfish or two in the tank as a food source for the other animals, but I've got carcasses lying all over the place in there. I think I have 2 dead crayfish and one that is the shell of a sloughed crayfish. You can see that is clearly just a sloughed shell and not an actual crayfish. That one, you can still see the meat in it, so that's a whole crayfish right there that's just lying there dead. And that one back there, the more I'm looking at it, I'm actually beginning to think that one back there is just a sloughed shell as well. So maybe I won't have to worry too much about that. I'll give it a little while and see if that chunky crayfish is still in there, and if he's still in there, I'll get him out. But this evening, we will be doing another water change. I'm going to do about maybe a 30 or 40%. I'm just going to knock the salt levels way back. And I'm not worried about stripping all the salt out of the tank completely, because obviously at the concentrations they're in, they're doing fine. So a normal water change after 24 hours should complete the treatment of the bacteria. And then just over time, as I do more water changes, the tank will come back to my normal salt-free environment. And who knows, maybe if I find out that the salt's actually doing these fish a little bit of good, depending on what we end up with this tank in the long run, adding some salt to it might be part of my everyday maintenance of this tank, so we'll see how that goes. Anyway, there was your Friday morning update on the native tank. Don't forget to subscribe. You never know what you're going to get with me, but as of late and for the next little while, we're going to be getting a lot of videos of this tank. So if you enjoy this tank, make sure you're subscribed. And of course, if you're interested in any of my other many tanks I have just around this room alone, you can make sure you're subscribed, and that way you won't miss any of the updates I've got on any of those tanks. So don't forget, this one is my native tank. Thanks for watching. Look forward to some more updates in the very near future, and I will see you real soon.